this is my book, Fried in a Hubcap. And I'll tell you a story a little bit about how it came about, and then I thought I would read to you about the Festival of Light. Is this on, your sound thing? Okay, good. So, in 1970, I got married, and for a wedding present, I got a freighter trip around the world. And it was a Philippine freighter company. So we started in New York, and we went down to the Panama Canal, and then up the West Coast, and then across the Pacific for 18 days. And then we went around the Philippines for, I guess, 3 weeks or a month, and then up into Asia. And we went to Hong Kong and Japan. And by the time we got to Japan, I was pretty sick of freighter travel. And the next part of the trip was going to be from Japan or Hong Kong one to the tip of South Africa. And that was going to be a 3-month voyage.
Wow.
And neither of us wanted to be on the ship anymore. It was really getting old. So we decided we'd get off, we'd jump ship, and we'd start traveling overland. And we did. So the first part of the book is about my husband, Glenn. Our marriage did not last through the whole honeymoon, but we had lots of fun. It was a year of travel, and then I met someone we traveled overland, and I met a French guy in Kathmandu, Patrick. The second part of the book is the book of Patrick, and we traveled together and went to Morocco, and one of the things we did there was have a restaurant. And then the third part of the book, after Patrick and I parted ways, I went back to the US and met Doug, and we traveled in Central America, and that's where my kids were born. Our kids were born. He and Glenn have both gone to heaven by now, I hope. But I thought I would read the part about when Patrick and I lived in Morocco, and we had a restaurant. And the reason we did that was when we first got to, I had it marked, when we first got to this little village called Diabet, or the town of Essaouira, we met this Danish woman. And she was very, very sweet, very beautiful, and then she sort of started having this nervous breakdown later on. And she left us with 50 pounds of brown rice and moved back to Denmark to be with her family, because she was not in good shape. And we decided, well, we had 50 pounds of rice, we'd start a restaurant. So we didn't realize that it was going to take a little more than that. One of the things we had to do was transport food from town to our little village, and we didn't have a car. And so we went to the donkey market, and we bought donkeys. And then they got stolen, so it was a long story. But one of the things that happened when we had the restaurant was this thing called the Festival of Light. And the village we lived in, Diabet, which is now, when I see pictures of it, Diabet it was always perched on this hill, and it was this little village full of whitewashed adobe houses with a river on one side and a forest on the other side, and on the other side of the forest was the sea. And now, Diabet is full of condominiums. I know. And there's the river, I guess it's still there, they left the river. And the forest is all gone, and now there's 2 golf courses there, where the forest used to be. But the sea is still there too. So, let's see how much I explain. Oh, there was a guy who lived down on the beach when we had our restaurant. Californians of a certain type on the road. Oh, wait. Reading glasses. Yes, this is going to help. I always forget to bring them. Okay, good. Californians of a certain type on the road were always easy to spot. They had the most amazing neon blue eyes, blonde hair, and were always tallish and usually great looking. Sometimes they were also pretty intense, like the young woman who wanted to tell me about Jesus at the beginning of my journey, when all I wanted to do was buy some acid for the freighter trip. To be fair, I also met Australians who looked like this, kind of electric. So I don't remember this guy's name, but he was a Californian like that, wrapped in an old blanket, wandering around with a mission to create a gathering of light that would draw all high beings together for a night of peace and love, or whatever. A night of acid and drumming was more like it. So we're two donkey-riding hippies, really not part of any big social scene, and one day we run into a guy who thinks he's a prophet. We had seen him before, since he basically lived on the beach near the village in a blanket that was both his clothing and his bed. On this day, his hair was stiff and standing straight up from salt water, his skin leathery and tanned, and he had those bright electric blue eyes. And what excitement! He had come to tell us about this wonderful event that would be happening that very night. Have you heard about the Festival of Light, he asked us, eyes glowing with a great deal of enthusiasm and expectation in his voice. No, we haven't. What's that? Answered Patrick, very politely. And he told us in the most extravagant terms about bringing together the lovers of peace and harmony in one beautiful, earth-changing, planet-reviving night of love and celebration. He would have waved his arms, but they were holding up his blanket, his only clothing. Great, that sounds wonderful. We both nodded and assented the way you do when someone is all excited, inviting you to something, and you know perfectly well you're not going to go. Where's it going to be? He smiled at us benignly. He had saved the best news for last. It's tonight, at your restaurant, when the sun goes down. That night, as the full moon rose over the little village of Diabet, 400 hippies from Essaouira and beyond gathered in the village. They crammed into our courtyard, all tripping and stoned, but peaceful. Those that couldn't fit in the courtyard settled out on the hillsides surrounding the village, building fires, drumming and dancing wild dances and screaming their delight into the night. Since I was powerless to do anything, and it was so out of any control that there was nothing that could be done anyway, I sat in my corner, cooking and watching. It was pretty peaceful for being so crowded until the cops came. Someone in Diabet had contacted the police in Essaouira, and suddenly, there they were at our door. Patrick, who had been cruising the crowd as director of Good Vibrations, met him at the door. He was calm. He explained that we were a bit surprised by all the people, but everyone was having a good time, and there was no evil intent. The Diabetans were terrified by all the fires and chanting, but Pat convinced the cops that it was just a way of partying. There was nothing dark going on. He kept the vibe nice and high and easy, so that the 100 or so people tripping in our courtyard stayed nice and easy too. And none of those bad currents were allowed to start. It worked. The cops left, unbelievably leaving all those nuts in our hands. What did they think they were going to do anyway? 4 cops to 400 tripping, howling hippies. But someone picked up a bad vibe. A young Moroccan, high on acid and probably a little unsteady anyway, had gotten spooked. It wasn't enough to get 400 people all to Diabet. Part of all this festival of light theology was acid for everyone who wanted it, whether they were already a bit fried or not. So this guy, tripping and freaking out, grabbed my big chopping knife that was lying near me. I had been so focused on the police at the door I hadn't noticed, and all of a sudden he was armed. Glazed and threatening, he swung around, brandishing the knife at everyone near him. People pressed against the walls and panic started. Just the scenario you want to never be in. And then there was Patrick, slowly and quietly walking toward this guy with his hand outstretched, telling him he'd be fine, just give him the knife. Over and over, his voice low and soothing, Patrick said, "You're safe here. Nothing bad can happen to you here. Just take it easy and give me the knife." He walked straight up to the guy as everyone else backed away and gently put his hand on the guy's shoulder, taking the knife from him. Handing me the knife, he led the guy up the stairs to a more private courtyard so he could help him calm down. When they finally came back down, most of the people were gone. That was fine with me. Ever after, that guy called Pat Jesus Christ.
That's cool.
Yeah. So the book takes me pretty much around the world. And usually what I do at a reading is just ask people what part of the world they want to hear about. Anybody have any, from Asia to, well, you've heard about Morocco now, to Central America, or if you have any questions about the book.
Blairsville.
No, Blairsville's not in this book.
Did you go
Thank you, though.
That's too
Did you
bad.
go to China?
I did not go to China, and for some reason, I've just never wanted to.
How about Kathmandu?
I did go to Kathmandu,
What do you want to tell us about that?
if I can find it. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, did you ever go to Australia?
To where?
Australia?
No, I didn't. No, it wasn't exotic enough.
How about, where did you have your children?
I had my children in Belize,
Oh,
Both of them?
both of them.
let's hear about Belize too.
Yeah, let's just go to Belize.
So let's go to Belize.
Yeah.
That's
about
so easy.
The kids.
I could tell you about getting to Belize, about getting busted in Mexico,
That sounds good too.
or not getting busted in Mexico.
Tell us the year as well.
I'll do my best.
Wait, give her some more wine.
1975, I think. Yeah, I was traveling with this, well, I was traveling with Doug, who's the father of the children, my 2 sons. And we were in Palenque in southern Mexico when he found out his sister had been killed in a car accident. And we were also traveling with his juvenile delinquent brother, because I think that their parents wanted us to take him away so that they could get rid of him for a while, because he was really awful. Sorry, Scotty, if you ever see this. So I was alone in Palenque. He and Scotty had gone back to the States, and I met this girl named Colette from Florida, and she said she would travel with me. But I didn't know she was traveling with a half a pound of weed. And the last thing I wanted to do was get busted pregnant in Mexico. Yeah.
Not a good picture.
No, it was a bad picture. So Colette kept getting us in trouble. We drove into some little village in Mexico and all the guys fell in love with her. She was 20 and blonde and very plump, which they just thought was fabulous. And I was 27, so I told them I was her mother and they all believed me. And so they all said, "Mama, we love your daughter." And they sat around our hotel room all night outside the front door, and the door didn't have a lock on it. So that was kind of the kind of place I ended up with Colette. And so we ended up in San Cristobal de las Casas. And Colette had a knack for trouble. The next day, while I was reconnecting with old friends out by the chicken rotisserie, which was the warmest spot in town, she went off with a man she had just met who invited her back to his house to get high. That night, we all, meaning all these hippies staying in the hotel, paid for Colette's good time, or more accurately, her date's lack of one. She had a thing about not seeing the obvious, especially if it meant that looking at what was really happening would get in the way of getting high. After she smoked all this guy's pot and drank the better part of a bottle of rum, he made his move. She was totally indignant. See what I mean? He brought her back to the hotel, totally pissed off at her refusal, and went to talk to his buddies in the local policia. We didn't know any of this was going on, of course. We, meaning everyone but Colette, who paid it no mind. I want to make my position clear here. I no way thought Colette had to fuck this guy because she drank and smoked him dry. But I did feel it was manipulative and naive to do all that in the first place. It's a matter of context and culture. The guy was either police or friends with the police. That evening, we were sitting around in our room, Colette and I, and a man I was friends with from before, and I went out to pee in the outhouse in the courtyard. Suddenly, I heard noises and looked down. 8 pairs of shiny black shoes surrounded the outhouse, their toes visible from inside. Oh no. Shiny black shoes are always a big red flag. I came out, because of course I couldn't stay in there, and was immediately surrounded. "Sus papeles," they demanded, as if everyone takes their passport to go for a pee, I responded. "Sus papeles de ustedes." So they were asking for my papers, and I said, "No, your papers." Pretty brave, huh? If I was going to get surrounded and threatened and interrogated, whatever these guys had in mind, I at least wanted to make sure they were authorized to do what they were going to do. The shoes should have been the giveaway. There was the chief of police, the magistrate of so-and-so, the mayor, maybe. Anyway, there were 8 high-ranking government officials, and we were in some considerable shit if we got busted. That was for sure. 2 prayers. The first, that Colette not be smoking pot when I opened the hotel door, since nobody but me knew about this little drama taking place in the courtyard. Second, that I not go to a Mexican jail and have this baby start out life in such a totally inauspicious circumstance. Bingo. Colette was still sitting on her bed where I left her, in her frumpy pajamas, with a blanket around her and her ample bottom planted on her bed right over where her stash was hidden under her mattress. There was no pot smoke in the air. Gracias a Dios. Amazingly, only one of the men followed me to the room, while the others fanned out to terrorize the rest of the residents. He told our male friend to leave, which he happily did, then planted himself by the door watching us. This guy didn't speak any English, so I said to Colette, "Whatever you do, don't get up. They won't move you, so don't move." Then I racked my brain for something to do, something that would turn this from a woman's boudoir to an unappealing, maybe even revolting scene. I remembered my friend Susan telling me how she had thwarted a rapist by sticking her finger down her throat and throwing up all over herself and him. It did the trick for her, since it was obviously a turnoff, and my biggest fear was going to jail and getting raped, with either possibility on its own equally terrifying. So I suggested something cheerier and measurably less revolting. Turning to Colette with a cheery smile, I grinned, "Let's have oatmeal." She stared at me like I'd gone mad until I said, "What could be more unappealing?" And she got it. Thank God for Coleman camping stoves and countries where you bring all your stuff in from the car into your hotel room. Right then and there, I made us a big old pot of oatmeal, this man watching us warily from the door the whole time. I think he probably wanted to bolt, especially when I offered him a big, gloppy bowl full, and then ate it myself when he refused. We loved that oatmeal. We squished it through our teeth and slopped it around with our mouths full and open as he stood and stared. "Ooh, that was good. Want some more?" By the time I had a second pot full on the stove, some of the other guys came to check in with their buddy. He said something to them in hurried, low tones, and they all left. They just left. None too soon either, since we had eaten that whole first pot and we're gonna have to start in on the second one. Down the hall, somebody got busted, and it was surely Colette's fault for being such an airhead.
Good for oatmeal. Good story.
It's true. It's all true.
So was the
Wild
plan,
woman.
so was the plan to stick your finger down your throat and regurgitate the oatmeal if things got tight?
If I had to. Anything but jail.
Have you had any oatmeal since then?
Not much. It worked. It got rid of them.
I like oatmeal.
Me too.
I don't like grits, but I like oatmeal.
Well, now you'll think of me when you eat oatmeal.
Every time.
You'll think of Mexican police.
So when did you make it to Belize?
From there,
From it, and that's when you had your children? Or was your
I was pregnant
first
at that
child born
point.
in Mexico?
No, they were both born in Belize. And I talk about the whole reason we did this trip was that the Vietnam War was going on, or had gone on. No, it wasn't going on anymore. And we had seen our friends getting drafted, and we wanted to create safety for our sons if we had sons, and have them in a country where they would have, what do you call that?
Dual citizenship.
Well, not just dual citizenship, but anywhere where they could take refuge. Yeah, and Belize, they do have dual citizenship, or they could. And so we didn't know any way to do it because the internet wasn't really operating or hadn't been invented yet in 1975, because Doug would have known all about that. So we decided we'd get in the car with me. I was only like 3 or 4 months pregnant at the time. And we'd go find a place to have a kid that met our requirements. So Mexico wasn't good because it didn't, at that time, there was no, you couldn't buy land there. You couldn't really have any rights just because you had a child there. Guatemala was no good because if you had a baby there, you had to pay $800 to take the baby out of the country, and we never had $800. And then we got to Belize, and in Belize they spoke English, which was really a great relief for Doug because he never did learn to speak Spanish. And you could have all your rights, and the child could have dual citizenship, and so Belize it was. And Doug lied to me, of course, and said it was very, very clean and very modern, none of which was true. But by then I was like 8 months pregnant, and there was no more arguing.
How did you meet Tiny Tim?
How did I meet Tiny Tim? Okay, so I was in college in Boston, and I was dating this guy, Jimmy Pullis, who's gone now, and he managed acts, and he managed music acts, and he managed variety acts, just short of animal acts. And so I was staying at my parents' house in Chappaqua, which is about an hour north of the city, and he came down from Boston. He said, I'm going to take you to the city tonight to meet somebody really interesting. And it was Tiny Tim. So we went to this club on the west side of Manhattan. It was this really grubby, kind of sleazy club. And there was this guy, Tiny Tim, was doing his act. And I think it was well before he got famous. Was it on Johnny Carson or on Ed Sullivan or something? Smothers Brothers?
Wasn't it the Smothers Brothers?
Okay. And the whole place was really skeevy and gross. And he was very tall, and he bent over this teeny little ukulele, and his hair was hanging down. I hope I can't get sued for this. And he played like this, and he sang, "Ee," you know, in a really high, horrible voice. And after he'd done his act, Jimmy said to him, Tiny, you want us to take you home to your mom's? He still lived with his mom in the Bronx. Jimmy had a Porsche. And so that meant that Tiny and I got to sit together in the passenger seat. And I was sort of half on the deal that goes in the middle and half squished up on Tiny. And every time we hit a bump or went around a curve, he went, "Oh, Miss Koshi." "Oh, Mr. Jimmy." And so we went out for breakfast. We ended up someplace up in the Bronx near his mom's. It was like 4 or 5 in the morning by then. And I had on this gorgeous wool scarf that my boyfriend in high school had given to me, that somebody had hand knitted, and it was really nice. And Tiny said, "I love your scarf." And I said, "Oh good, me too." "I really love it. It's so beautiful, Miss Koshi." "Oh yeah, me too." And finally I said, "Here, you want to see it?" Bad move. So I never got my scarf back. He went completely deaf from that point on, and he had the scarf. So I should have learned that famous people are not all they're meant to be, or something.
Especially if they tiptoe through tulips.
He did not tiptoe. Miss Koshi. Anyway, I was going to tell you about Rasta and Pablo getting born in Belize. And so the reason, like I said, the reason I got to Belize was because no place else was really viable for having a baby. Mexico wasn't good in those days. Guatemala, we couldn't afford to take the baby back out if we had him there. And so we decided on Belize, and we ended up in this little fishing village called Sartaneja, which is in the northern part of Belize, and it's on a peninsula. And when we lived there, there was an airstrip being built, and I think it was for Ollie North and his
Arms thing.
importations.
Yeah.
Traveling troubadours.
Traveling tours. Yeah, I never was really there for that part of Sartaneja, but I heard a lot about it. The road took about 8 hours or 10 hours. You couldn't go more than 10 miles an hour. And so you had to go back and forth to Sartaneja by boat, and it was across a bay. So if the wind was with you, you were good. If the wind was not with you, you had to tack back and forth like this across the bay, and it took forever. So mostly what women there did was when they got into their 8th month of pregnancy, they moved to town across the bay and moved into the hospital and just lived in the hospital until they had a baby. Well, you know, I wasn't going to do that. So instead, I had Rasta quite supernaturally in Sartaneja. So I could call this birthing Belizean style, only it wasn't. For one thing, no Sartaneja woman went swimming the day she gave birth, especially in a bikini. The closest I saw to it was Sartaneja women wading out in their dresses. They didn't even have bathing suits or swim, much less when they were pregnant. Hardly anyone, including the fishermen who went out to sea, knew how to swim. That was always amazing to me, that nobody knew how to swim, but they would live on boats. Secondly, if a baby was late, as mine was according to my U.S. doctor's forecast due date, the woman almost always went to the mainland to have the baby in the hospital. And third, as I found out well after the fact, nobody who knew any better used Nurse Gwen for their delivery. She was brutal. Nobody in town told me about the government nurse, Nurse Gwen. As soon as I got there, I had registered for her classes on prenatal care, and all the pregnant women were there getting their vitamins and their checkups, but nobody told me not to let her deliver the baby. I had my natural childbirth book, The Spiritual Midwifery from Ina May Gaskins, which I had read to tatters and found comforting and encouraging. But the government nurse totally poo-pooed it, giving me instead a horrifying book on birth defects and possible catastrophic birthing disasters with color pictures. That would have been a good clue. But I was pregnant for the first time in an extremely foreign culture and clueless. I didn't actually know I had a choice and didn't know who or where to ask, since I saw all the pregnant ladies there at her prenatal classes. But first, the swimming. It was hot. Of course it was hot. It was mid-June in Belize, and I was 3 weeks overdue. I remembered a story I read somewhere about a Rastafarian in Jamaica who liked to swim out as far as he could in the ocean for the rush of seeing if he could make it back. It seemed like a sensible idea, which is a measure of what pregnancy and tropical heat can do. I waded out as far as I could in the bay, and then I swam until I had a contraction. Just one. Then I swam back in, put my dress over my wet bikini, and walked the 3 blocks home to our rental house and went into labor. Doug ran over to Gwen's house, very close to ours, to wake her up and tell her I was in labor. She arrived quickly with her assistant, who was a really sweet village woman. Both of them were black as night and had neon pink rollers in their hair. Quite the vision. The nurse kept belching and saying, all ladylike, "Oh, pardon me, I took a laxative." If I hadn't been in labor, it would have been funny. I had issues of my own to deal with, this whole having a baby thing. It was hard work, worse than skiing. And that bitch nurse made it really hard and dangerous. I'll spare you most of the details, except to say I was torn by her fingers and not by the birth. Rasta was born with a large hematoma on his head that took 3 weeks to go down, and I was a mess. It was a horrifying and scary experience when I was so prepared for this gentle, beautiful delivery I'd been reading about. Instead of being born calm and quiet, Rasta was born stressed and screaming, and pissed right in Doug's face as he came out. That was another prophecy of birth. He was born at 6:25 as Venus was on the horizon, the morning star. We put on the birth certificate that Rasta was born on June 15th, 1976. It was a Sunday, and it was Father's Day. Oh boy, I thought in a spasm of overachiever nonsense. What a great gift for our dads. By Tuesday, I was able to walk to the village phone, which worked in good weather, and telephone both our families. I don't remember what mine said, but Doug's dad, Howard, said, "Rastus? What'd you name that baby Rastus for?" 27 years later, sitting around our backyard in Georgia having dinner with Rasta and his friend Frank, who are visiting from California, for some reason we got on the subject of birthdays. out of the blue, or so it seemed, Frank told Rasta, I hate to tell you this, but in June of '76, the 15th was on a Tuesday, not Sunday. The worst of it was, he was right. No, the worst of it was, I felt like a total wreck hippie parent that didn't even know the day he was born. It was a Sunday, I'm pretty sure. So you would have thought, after that I'd know better.
How many years are between your two boys?
2 2/3.
So you pretty much stayed in Belize after that?
No, we came back to the States and we lived in Woodstock, and we went back to Belize just for a little while. It was supposed to be. And I was never going to have another baby in Belize. It was supposed to be. And then one night, Doug had gone over to the mainland because the village phone, we still only had one phone in the village, and it only worked when the weather was good. So if it was raining or the wind was blowing too hard, there was no phone. And I was pretty nervous about having this next child because the first time the delivery had been so horrible. And Doug went back to the mainland to call his mom and say that we were going to come back and I was going to have the baby in the States. But the midwife had burned her house down. She had emptied out her wood stove and put all the ashes on her front porch. So I couldn't go there. And
That was a good sign.
yeah, no kidding. I'm just getting to the part where, so I was having dinner. Doug was gone with Agnes, who was supposedly our babysitter. And our new sailing friends, English Jeffrey and his girlfriend Bobby, who was a half German, half Aboriginal Australian, Sam, a Belizean, and Claudia, his German girlfriend, were all having dinner with me at our place. And it was like the UN. Everybody was from someplace else. Bobby made a delicious chicken curry. The guys had been amusing Rasta, who finally fell asleep in his hammock. The second he did, my water broke all over the place. Oh shit. I was still thinking we had time to go back to the States. I guess not. I sent Claudia and Sam and Jeffrey out for diapers, baby clothes, and a midwife, while Bobby stayed to help me. We got back inside, and I started having contractions. She looked at me worriedly. Oh my God, I hope it's not the curry. I said no. I was reassuring her that this had started months before, way before the curry, and Jeff showed up with the cutest, teeniest little Mayan midwife. She was wearing a white nurse dress because she was just walking home from delivering her 350th baby. She had never delivered a gringa baby before, and she was kind of excited by the prospect. She told me to rest. She was going home to get her birthing kit refreshed, and she'd come back in a couple of hours. It rapidly became obvious that we didn't have a couple of hours. Someone went to fetch her, and she came in with her birthing kit. It was 3 cotton balls, a piece of string, and a washcloth for mopping her brow. It's a good thing we had scissors, and boiling water, and sheets, and towels. Sam and Claudia were over in the corner making out. I told them they had to get out, they were distracting me. Soon I had to tell Bobby that if she didn't stop saying, oh my, every breath I took, she was going to have to get out too. She promised to pull herself together. It was 11:20 when I gave my first little wimpy, half-hearted push. I wish someone else could do this, I told the room. There were no takers. Jeffrey held my hand and looked into my eyes, and then I closed them and pushed one big push, and there was Pablo, all blue and silent. 11:25 p.m., February 11th, 1979, my parents' wedding anniversary. Bobby uttered a huge, "Oh my." "Is it a boy or a girl?" I asked. The midwife said, "Shh." And I realized I didn't care. She stroked his spine gently, and then he began to breathe and turned all pink. It was the birth I had dreamed of, except for the hard work pushing part. No tearing, no screaming, nothing like before. The next morning when Rasta woke up, he popped his head over the edge of his hammock and looked down at me on the bed, which was a mattress on the floor. "Look who showed up last night." I showed him his baby brother. He gave a grin and climbed down to check him out. We were snuggling on the mattress on the floor with Pablo when I heard the family talking on the other side of the wall we had in common. "How come the gringa has her baby in 1 hour, and our daughter has been waiting in the hospital for a month?" I had an opinion on that. I thought it just might be because I ate natural, healthy food instead of living on white bread and canned margarine and out-of-date Bama peanut butter and jelly. I also thought my activity level, walking and swimming and doing yoga instead of sitting around packing on the pounds of junk food, might have something to do with it, but hey, what do I know? I'm not a doctor.
Very good. Good story.
That's enough stories. So did that answer your questions
Yes.
about births and beliefs?
Yes, very much so.
I was at a couple of home births in the States, and it's not much different, except that, you know, when the midwife showed up and all she had was literally 3 cotton balls and a piece of string this long.
What was she doing with the cotton balls? I mean, I've been in home births. We don't use cotton balls.
I think that maybe you put alcohol on them and dab the end of the
Umbilical.
umbilical.
Oh, well, you don't need to do that technically.
Strings tied off.
Dental
String
floss
tied.
is what you need. Not string,
They didn't
dental
have
floss.
dental floss back then.
I didn't have teeth.
I used to teach emergency childbirth, and I just said, carry your dental floss. But I never said, bring some cotton balls.
And drink alcohol.
Cotton balls. So people would ask me what it costs to have a midwife deliver a baby. So this is the system in Belize was that until the umbilical cord fell off, that woman came every day. She massaged me, she massaged the baby, she bathed him. And so I was like gonna super glue that thing on. So that was 11 days of that, and all she wanted in return was a raincoat with matching boots.
Oh.
So when we went to Belize City, we got her a raincoat with matching boots and a matching umbrella. And her teeny little feet, she had like size 4 feet, like she was so tiny. She was really sweet. I have great pictures of her with Pablo. And so they were the only 2 blue-eyed babies that most of the people in the area had ever seen. You've probably seen this in the Bahamas. And people would come from all over to look at their eyes. And they go, "Mira sus ojos, look at their eyes." Because they had blue eyes, and they'd never seen blue eyes on a baby before.
Pretty amazing, isn't it?
It's so amazing. Every place we went in Belize, every place we sailed to up and down the country, people would come out and they'd know us because we had had our babies in Belize. Oh, Sartaneja boys. That was sweet.
That's cool.
The Mayan women and Mayan people, I always found to be the most peaceful people I ever met.
They were very,
Absolutely serene.
until they were drunks. They were bad drunks, not the women, the men.
Did they ever take acid? Did they ever?
Not with me.
Okay. I figure you're the expert, we've asked.
No, I don't know. I don't think so. It was pretty back in the I mean, they wondered if someone had really walked on the moon.
Really?
Yeah.
People are still wondering.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
I know that.
Depends on who you ask.
I only began wondering that when they said they lost the directions on how to get there.
Yeah, I questioned it a little myself, you know, I saw that show and they had so many things that was like, oh my God, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, you know, maybe they didn't go.
Well, the people down there didn't think they went.
Yeah, there are people here who
They
don't
might
think
be
they
right.
Yeah,
There are people who still think the world is flat.
yeah, I believe that too.
You mean it's not?
Oh, Richard, he's just.
Yeah, just fall off the edge of the
Yeah, he's just.
That's why I stay here in the middle.
Well, I love the book. And is there any other part you'd like to share with us?
I don't know. It's up to you guys.
I'm all for it.
How did you come up with the title?
Oh, you haven't read the book, I guess.
I guess not.
Yeah.
Hmm. So, the title came from an unfortunate incident in Mexico where Doug decided to eat tacos that were fried in a hubcap. And he spent 5 days in bed, between bed and the toilet. He was really
Couldn't
sick.
drink the water there either.
No, you drink the tequila, that takes care of anything.
Well,
that
who
goes
would
in.
eat, besides him, who would eat tacos fried in black oil in a hubcap?
Yeah, no.
The same people who would eat sushi from a gas station.
If you see
Do
the
they do
cover
that?
of the book,
I have.
yeah, she was sitting on the ground frying stuff in a hubcap.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
That is classic.
I thought it was, Doug was always very optimistic about food.
Now, was that Doug and you on the picture?
Yes,
Tell them about the bus ride after the tacos.
well, you know, I was talking to my daughter-in-law on the way here, and I said, that diaper story, that's pretty intense for people. But if you want to film anymore, I'll read one more part and then, is it going? We're on the next round?
You're on it.
You're right.
Got about maybe 9 or 10 minutes on this segment, but I'll give you time and we'll just make a cut. And we can edit crap out if we need to.
Edit crap off? This is the crap on story.
Literally.
Yeah. Oh, where is it though? Ask some more questions. Anybody? Oh, good, me too.
So in Belize, were you using paper diapers or?
Oh, hell no. And that's
Awful.
such a good question, Kathy, because it's part of this story, Diapers in Paradise.
Well, my daughter was born in '77 and they just came out with the Pampers here, which were outrageously expensive. So I used cloth diapers, which was a whole experience in its own.
My daughter's born in 75, but I use, they're called Lugs instead of Pampers,
Yeah.
because they were a better quality than the Pampers. But
I couldn't afford them.
I told the husband, as long as you smoke cigarettes,
This is a diaper ad.
yeah, and as long as you smoke cigarettes, I get my diapers. Okay.
Well, apropos of your question about diapers. Diapers to first world mommies and daddies are no big deal, and now, more than 40 years later, they're probably no big deal in Central America either. Just about everyone up here in North America uses paper ones and throws them away. In Belize in '76, there were no paper ones. And in Guatemala, where this story takes place, a box of Pampers cost $8.
Wow.
That was roughly the same price as 800 avocados, or 80 freshly baked breads, 400 mangoes, 8 restaurant meals. Well, you get my drift. And so we used cloth diapers when we used diapers at all. And every port we sailed to, my immediate search was for enough fresh water to rinse them well. I could wash everything with seawater, but especially for a tender baby's butt, everything had to be rinsed well in fresh water to avoid rashes and harshness. This is the whole thing about when we went up the Rio Dulce, which is a river in Guatemala that people moved up to get out of the hurricanes in the Caribbean basin. And we were living in this horrible place. Mark knew a house we could have for free. Good God, someone should have paid us to stay there. It was a thatched hut in the jungle, accessible only by boat or a footpath that went through dense bush for about a mile to the nearest settlement. Living there was both terrifying and beautiful, with the balance tipping seriously towards terrifying when the sun went down and creatures started crawling. We slept in hammocks with the lanterns burning on low to discourage scorpions and fer-de-lance who lived in the area. Mark tried to put the make on me, telling me that he and his wife had an open relationship. It was probably true, but the only way I was ever going to sleep with him was if Rasta and I got to go live in their house, which had walls and a real kitchen and bathroom. Call me cheap and sleazy, but we were out of money and living like savages. After a couple of weeks, our friend Arthur got a ride back to Belize City. It was all he could take. Doug got a job working for some old American guy, and I was alone all the time with Rasta, and we were just trying to stay alive, trying to boil the water and strain all the wiggling things out of it, and shaking tarantulas out of the teacups. And then we had to go to Guatemala City to get paperwork so we could move along. Doug's mom had sent us $300, only she sent it as a U.S. postal money order, which was no good outside the U.S. She didn't realize that since she'd never been outside the U.S. So Doug gave it to the old American man he worked for, and we went to the city. To get to Guatemala City, we took the boat over to this crappy little collection of riverside shacks and caught a ride to the main road to take a bus, which you just waved down when it approached. We got a ride to the road in a pickup truck with a young man, his young wife, and baby. The baby was drinking something bright orange from a bottle. I asked the mom what it was, and she proudly exclaimed, "Fanta!" Pulled the bottle right out of her baby's mouth and offered it to Rasta. I refused politely, saying, "No thanks, he doesn't like orange. Besides, I'd like him to have his teeth someday," but I didn't tell her that part. So we stayed in a nice old hotel in the city near the bus station, and after the long bus ride, I was just damned if I was going to do all that and deal with diapers. I splurged and bought a box of Pampers. They turned out to be an excellent investment. We were 2 or 3 days in the city, eating in restaurants or street food, trying to conserve our money, and when we finally had our affairs in order, we boarded a bus as old as the hills to take us back to the river. It was packed, but we found a couple of seats toward the back and settled in for the few hours of ride home. So here we are in Guatemala City, and I've bought Pampers, which turned out to be an excellent investment. So we finally are finished in the city, and we board a bus to take us back to the river. It was packed, but we found a couple of seats toward the back and settled in for the couple of hours ride back. Doug started complaining of his stomach cramping. Let it be noted for the record, Doug was an eternal optimist when it came to culinary adventures on the road. And as a tender-stomached Libra, he couldn't take it. This wasn't quite as severe as the time he indulged in tacos, fried in black grease in a hubcap, on my first ever trip to San Miguel de Allende that gave this book its name. although this time it was certainly explosive. That time, back in San Miguel, we were walking back to our hotel when we saw the woman frying tacos in a hubcap in the blackest, nastiest looking grease, like what comes out when you change your engine oil. Doug walked toward her. "You're not going to eat that, are you?" I asked him. "Yeah, sure, it looks good." I wish my kids could do it. They can do Doug's voice so perfectly, but anyway, they're not here. "Doug," I told him, "that grease is black. No telling where it's been." "Nah," he drawled in his charming southern drawl. "It's fine. All the Mexicans eat it." That would have been my opportunity to point out two things so obvious I let them slide. Number one, he wasn't Mexican. Number two, there was nobody else eating it. He spent 5 days in bed shaking, freezing, boiling and shivering between mad dashes to the toilet while I took walks around town, checking in periodically to make sure he was still alive. But this time on the bus was more cinematic. As the bus would chug and churn up a hill, Doug's face would get super white and he'd start to sweat. Just as I would be about to yell to the driver that he had to stop, that my esposo was sick, we'd crest the hill and coast, and somehow, stopping the grinding of the motor would relieve the urgency in his bowels. "Doug, you have to let me have him stop," I told him several times. But each time he refused. He said the bus was so old, if it stopped on the uphill, it probably wouldn't be able to make the hill. Maybe he was right. We never put it to the test. We were in the back, sitting next to a little native girl of about 10 who shyly studied us. "Please, honey," I'm thinking, "don't get the idea all foreigners are like us." Doug sweated and paled over one more hill. He might not want to be eating for this part. And suddenly, desperately said, "Get me a diaper."
No.
Yes, I grabbed one and handed it to him, and he slid it somehow into his pants or under him, and sitting there next to that poor little girl, he unloaded the hugest pile of stinking wet poop I ever saw, especially in one diaper. The girl's eyes were like saucers. I was doubled over laughing, for which he never forgave me, and then he said, "Get me another one." After he filled that one up, he managed to heave them both out the open window, right over a man sleeping there with his mouth open. Thank God they made it intact. I was helpless, laughing like mad and hanging on to Rasta and not helpful at all. Men in the front of the bus started yelling, "Siento la mierda aquí," which means I smell shit here. Well, hell yeah. Our stop was only another couple of miles, which was a damn good thing. And of course, once off the bus, he was fine. We got back to our hovel, threw all our shit on the boat, and got the hell out of there. Especially having been in the city in a hotel, this contrast coming back was just insane. Somehow we got the boat back to Sartaneja, secured it for the duration, headed back to Panajachel on our way back to the USA.
All right. Yes.
Ride in a hubcap. Thank you. The end.
The end.
Very good, very good.
Cheers.
Oh, good.
Yeah, excellent.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. Except that last part.
Well, it wasn't a sick way. But it did bring out the laughter. Like I said, a sick way.
It was sick, but funny.
Thank goodness for the diaper.
Yeah, but I'm trying to picture, number one, were these newborn diapers or were they big diapers? And how did he get them in the right location without having accidents?
I
on
always
the side?
wondered that, how did he manage that?
Yeah,
It was a miracle.
it was a miracle. You know, there's plenty of wine and there's more crackers and cheese and stuff and